Reflections. Is there a technical culture? Excerpts from The Technological Bluff by Jacques Ellul.
You know what Pac-Man stands for? Program and control. He's program and control man. The whole thing is a metaphor. All he can do is consume. He's pursued by demons that are probably just in his own head. And even if he does manage to escape by slipping out one side of the maze, what happens? He comes right back in the other side. People think it's a happy game. Well, it's not a happy game. But luckily, Pac-Man didn't affect us as kids. Otherwise, we'd be running around in dark rooms,
munching pills, and listening to repetitive electronic music.
Technique is here. It is everywhere. It is not represented merely by some useful objects. The whole field of computers is a challenge to our thinking. Are we able to think about the technical phenomenon? Are we able to think this thought of the computer? Can we continue to nurture culture on the ancient soil, a culture that can be popular, but the people have changed, or lofty, but does it not then lose its grip on reality and take refuge in dreams and ideas? We have always conceived of what we call culture within and on the basis of our material, social, everyday concrete world. Technique is here. It is our environment. Can we abstract ourselves from it? That is our problem. Before we move further into this inquiry, let us define what is meant by the term technique. Ellul's own comprehensive definition is found in the preface of The Technological Society. Technique, he says, is the totality of methods, rationally arrived at and having absolute efficiency for a given stage of development in every field of human activity. The projects of enthusiasts for technical culture, politicians, scientists or technocrats, also professors and entrepreneurs have, along with nuances which we shall note, three fundamental aspects: the acquisition of technological knowledge,
Ready? Go!
the adapting of the young to the technical environment, not just manipulation, but making them comfortable in it, and finally the creation of a psychological mood that is favorable to technique, an openness to everything pertaining to it. These are the general orientations, but we must try to analyze the currents and motivations. First, among the promoters of technical culture, we may distinguish between the minimalists and the maximalists. The minimalists want to preserve all ancient culture with its orientation to art and literature, that is, a classical intellectual education, and add it to a knowledge and use of techniques, bringing them into the existing structure. The maximalists postulate the totality of technique and its demands, which are vast enough and which imply a global questioning and the invention of a new culture on a technical basis and with a technical content, which is both its object and its means. Naturally, the maximalist trend is the most interesting to study. It is also winning the day. The triumph of the microcomputer has contributed to its expansion in the sense of its inevitability. The many tasks that this remarkable machine can perform and the multiplying of information that it makes possible have carried away its creators. After all, culture is simply the transmitting and organizing of information, and since everything is changing in this domain, there must also be a change of culture, a dazzling task. The interposing of the technical object between us and the world takes on another sense. Whether in the domestic, educational, medical, or commercial field, the value of consumption lies less in the actual cost of what we buy than in that of the progress of knowledge. We are moving into an economy based on the production and circulation of immaterial goods, that is, knowledge and information. The important thing is the reappropriation of the knowledge of which industrialization robbed us. After many centuries of divorce between highly specialized technique and non-specialized culture, the technopole now mediates between what some know and what others do. There is thus a return to the technical culture that has marked each stage of human development. In this attempt at reappropriation, we benefit from a second-degree technology whose goal is to make access more and more simple to technologies that are more and more complex. These are the facilitating technologies. They restore us access to knowledge, but they also reestablish contact with other people. These are the interceding technologies. Overcoming space, telecommunications enable us to talk to anyone on Earth. Overcoming time, recordings, audio and visual, provide us with a living memory of humanity, the past and the future. According to this analysis, the twin axis of this technical culture is, first, the use of machines and the access to knowledge, and second, communication with others. These are the two elements in any culture. But there is more to it than that. We are beginning to get used to the idea that we can no longer picture the world as made up of fixed things or objects, but that we must think of everything, whether in physics, economics, or sociology, as in flux. But the new theory now thinks of things not in terms of transitory flux, but in terms of a new organization of the whole world in the form of networks, which differ totally from the new worlds that 10 years ago were imagined according to the model of fixed techniques. The logic of networks is closer to that of language than to that of territory. The distinction is a good one. As a result of the computer, everything now is not flux, but a network of information. Every human activity is now set within a network, or an intersection of many networks, that are combining and will finally become a global network. It is thought, which will be the agent and expression of all possible combinations of networks. We have here a subtle and constantly changing force, which before our very eyes, without our being aware of it, is structuring a new world. The indispensable thing is to realize what is going on, to learn the new rules of the game, to create a new culture. If we succeed, we will be citizens of this new world. If we fail, we will be its slaves. The computer plays a role in the production of knowledge in anthropology and sociology, since by its artistic and generally creative use, it is bound to have an impact on culture, to obstruct the perceptions individuals and social groups have of themselves, in brief, to expand profoundly on the imaginary. But it is not merely the creative capacity in these areas that we have to take into account. We have to understand that there will be a transformation of all human activity. Microcomputers permit everywhere things made to order, and hence mean the disappearance of products for the masses, and a transformation of intelligence around the networks. In the economy, for example, we can think of an alliance between material production and immaterial information. This is a summons to the creativity which has to produce a new culture and which is absolutely necessary if we are to have the ability to use all the possibilities of computerization in daily life, at work, and in friendly relations. Only a new technical culture will enable us not to be like savages transplanted into the modern world. We have to translate technical invention into social practices and new modes of thinking which seek to make every relation transparent. This transparency is correlative to an information society, and it brings all information and all knowledge within the reach of all, so long as they have, in effect, a suitable culture. But this culture is not idealistic. It is in the process of making out of simple spectators, like ourselves, those who are competent to use complex machines, and then the computer freaks, who are able, for example, actually to invent new possibilities and problems for microcomputers. But the culture which is being created is not a direct human product. It results from the interfacing of the group and the machine. This interface allows individuals to master problems of communication that presuppose the transmission and processing of information. Naturally, this culture cannot remain enclosed in a limited world, in the circle of a province. Transmission and processing take place everywhere with startling speed. A culture of networks is possible only on an international scale. Based on the universality of knowledge, which is accessible to all and in all places, and also on the speed of relations, this culture has to be international. Naturally, the visionaries of this network culture have only scorn for what has thus far been regarded as culture, an intellectual, non-practical culture, the expression of an elite, an intellectualism of the parlor, a dusty university collection of outdated knowledge, an ethereal virginity of the intelligence which leads to the fantasy of human relations, a relational society, and similar amiable notions. Everything that has thus far been produced in the form of culture must be scrapped. And if some people are obstinate, within 10 years, they will be just as illiterate as those who could not read or write in the 19th century. The ability to use the computer will replace reading and writing. At a more modest, more concrete level, the first step is the development of a technical culture, beginning with education. We will not stress the fact that technology is becoming a separate discipline in our schools and that professional instruction is emerging from this ghetto. In primary schools, children are being initiated into science and technology, and colleges have systematic instruction in technology, in mechanisms, in automatism, in electronics, in management and administration, embracing the dimensions of conception, manufacture, and use. High schools have detailed instruction in industrial techniques and mechanics. As we foresaw in 1985, computers are being brought into the schools and colleges. Students will have to learn how to use computers, since these are now educational tools, aids to pedagogy. Curriculum reconstructing is making technique central. History becomes the history of techniques, and living languages become modern languages. Pedagogy, learning how to learn, is a central feature of this technicizing of instruction, which implies a culture of practical intelligence in place of reflective or critical intelligence. At issue here are social changes that professionalize and rationalize anterior actions. Instruction will now have a practical aim, inculcating the ability to do a job. Normally, then, teaching will be a more or less complex technique, and those who teach will be technicians. Teachers must have an ambiguous practice. At the same time, form the mind, give access to a certain culture, and transmit practical knowledge that can quickly be put to use. This might be done in two ways. An effort might be made to bring traditional values into the setting and practice of techniques. This is the great illusion of certain humanists. They think that we can maintain the existing culture and superimpose techniques upon it. They think that we can infuse traditional values into technique. The other way, which is more concrete and efficient, is that of popularizing science among both pupils and the public, who must be brought into technique at all costs. The object of this popularization is at the same time the circulation of knowledge and justification. The public must accept gigantic expenditures on science by being persuaded of its certain usefulness. Giving knowledge a form in which it can be exploited and understood is part of the work of research if this is to justify its funding. But popularization never transmits anything but discourse, and technical discourse is not scientific practice. Scientific knowledge cannot give birth to a culture, for it changes its nature when it transforms itself into discourse and forgets the conditions of its own production. Popularization cannot pretend to be anything other than a socializing of science that leads to a hierarchy of knowledge. Today, we live in a mass technoculture. It is characterized and diffused in many ways. There is linguistic change, the American myth, high-tech, technology, patchwork, network, the look, the feeling, etc. But it also follows a mechanized model. We program, we decode, we link up, we process messages, we make everything visual, even dance is mechanical. The setting is more important than the text. We are interactive, in an interface. We are in a network. Psychological jargon is also prevalent. Megalo, schizo, meso, sado. Relations, either structure or destructure. We are always in relation to money, to the body, to death. We are situated. These peculiarities of vocabulary are signs of culture change in which innovation is valued as such. The culture of modernity is a product of industry with the sanction of the state. It is the creation of a throwaway consumer society. It reflects the domination of currents and circuits over objects in transnational space thanks to the computer, which with other means of communication is the great agent of this technoculture that functions by segmenting knowledge and by eliminating those data that are not regarded as useful in this very formalized context. Knowledge is modeled on the stock of information, and its acquisition is dictated by the logic of the computer. This is what students must learn at school if they are not to be illiterate. But in spite of the promise of intercommunication, communication is always to and among people. This technoculture rests on the enormous mass of information, a saturation which makes it impossible to isolate, to assimilate, to establish relations and perspectives, in particular to grasp facts during their life. Information is splintered and ephemeral. The confusion in the use of words aggravates the ambiguity. Information, in the true sense, is the active investigation of data in terms of individual needs and interests. A mass of data as such, available in bulk, is of no significance, but this jumble is what is called information. These, then, are the main directions in the attempt either to bring technique into culture or to create a technoculture. I would note in summation that techniques have always played a part in culture, but the problem is that size, number, speed of development, omnipresence, and omnicompetence now make it impossible to insert techniques into a stable culture. On the contrary, techniques are now encircling and swallowing up all that has constituted culture from the beginnings of human history. At any rate, we must take into account two basic considerations regarding the relation between culture and technique. The first has its basis in the position of Ellul and of many theologians of the same period, who wanted to rehabilitate technique by setting it among other cultural fields because it expresses one dimension of being human. Ellul had an anthropological view of technique. He made humanity and technique co-extensive. Human beings, as he saw it, have been technicians from the very first. Technique is a mirror of humanity. We project ourselves into it, and in it extend our nature artificially. The human organism offers the key to technique. This continuity of humanity and technique finds itself backed by an instinctual theory, namely, that we satisfy deep, instinctual drives by engaging in it. This obviously means that there is coincidence between technique and culture. But the mistake of Galen and many other philosophers is to think of technique in itself without considering that the actual technical phenomenon today has nothing whatever in common with the techniques of earlier societies. An abstract ideology of technique bears no relation to knowledge of the present-day world. The other consideration is much closer to reality. Technical culture means knowing well the milieu in which we live. Those who do not have this culture do not know their own milieu and are doubly alienated. They have no mastery over their environment, and they are permanently dependent on those who have this knowledge. Technical culture means having the knowledge and the know-how which can give us personal mastery over our environment and control over the activities of those to whom we have to have recourse. The absence of this culture is a cause of generalized alienation. I will not insist upon the fact that the extension of techniques rules out an omni-technological culture. In surgery, computers, electricity, mechanics, genetic engineering, chemistry, and television, etc. That is a mere fantasy. Much more serious is the fact that the practical technical knowledge has nothing whatever to do with culture. This raises then the central question: what can we call culture?